Hello, everybody, and welcome back from spring break. I hope it was a lovely week. Thank you for joining us today as we are reading our close reading text, The Orchid Bus. Our transferable takeaway for today is that whenever you are reading informational texts, hold on to the big topic in your head and connect everything you read back to it in each section. This is going to help you to hold on to important ideas about the text rather than just random facts. As we read today, we're going to learn a whole bunch of information about a group of people in Miami who were working to protect orchid plants. So as we read, we want to hold on to that big topic in our head and connect all the little details about these people and their work back to the big picture and the main idea. As we read together today, remember you want to have 3 tabs open. Number 1, the video, which you already have open in a separate tab because you're hearing this now. Number 2, the text itself, the Orchid Bus PDF. And number 3, that Google Forms questions sheet where you have Orchid Bus Day 1 main idea with all of our questions we'll be answering together today, as well as the CFS for main ideas, the spot to write your main idea, a fun opinion question, and a nice picture of an orchid. Orchid Bus. Scientists and students team up to plant 1 million orchids across South Florida to save the plants from extinction. Every Friday during Alexa Martinez's sophomore year of high school, she'd hop on a school bus. But this wasn't your average school bus. This one was a sterile environment designed to save orchid plants. Called the STEM Lab, the bus brought a full botany lab to the parking lot of Biotech High School in Miami, Florida. 2 years later, Alexa, now 17, is still involved in STEM Lab and saving orchids. All of her hard work is for the Million Orchid Project. Started by the Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden in Coral Gables, Florida, the project's goal is to plant 1 million orchids in urban areas across South Florida. Hopefully, this project will save Florida's 6 endangered species of orchids from extinction. Since the project started in 2013, more than 83,000 orchids have been planted. Fairchild's botanists created the scientific school bus so students across South Florida could participate in the Million Orchid Project. Biotech High is one of the 100 schools in the Miami-Dade School District that have partnered with Fairchild to give students the opportunity to work in the STEM lab. Before moving on to the next section, let's scroll down and take a look at the first text feature, a photograph of the STEM lab bus. Students across Miami can help grow orchids in this bus called STEM Lab. Let's now answer the first question on our Google Forms. After filling out your name, you will see question number 1. What is the big topic of this article? Pause the video here, answer this question, and come back when you're done. Now that you've answered question number 1, let's go back to the text and continue reading. Flower fugitives. The Florida Everglades used to be home to millions of orchids. This swampy wetland once covered the southern 2/3 of Florida. Many of Florida's orchid species grow only on trees, and the Everglades forests of oak and mahogany trees provided a perfect habitat for the flowers. But in the late 1800s, people began stealing the blossoms to sell as houseplants. Some orchid poachers would even set fire to the forests to keep the plants rare and the prices high. Orchids are one of the most exploited groups of organisms on the planet, says Jason Dowling, a botanist at Fairchild. The arrival of the Florida East Coast Railway in the late 1800s made it even easier to bring millions of plants to northern states. We lost 3 or 4 species and massive numbers of orchids between the early 1900s and the 1940s, Downing says. At the same time, construction in southern Florida was booming, As the area became urbanized, much of the forests that the orchids relied on in the Everglades were cleared away for farming and houses. The combination of habitat loss and the orchid trade essentially wiped out South Florida's orchid population. Pause here. Before moving on to the next section, let's go back at that text feature. A few photos of some orchids, and the title, Inside the Bus, From Seed to Plant. 1. Glass milk bottles are sterilized and filled with a nutrient-rich black jelly called agar. Dust-sized orchid seeds are sprinkled into each bottle. 2. The bottles are sealed and placed on racks under a sun lamp to grow. The orchid growing process can take several years. Several years. Wow. 3. The orchids eventually outgrow their first containers. They are replanted into larger containers and keep growing. 4. Once the orchid has matured into a plant that can survive in the wild, it's transplanted to a suitable tree. It's up to nature now. Let's pause here. We just read the text feature, Inside the Bus, From Seed to Plant, as well as the section of the text, Flower Fugitives, from here down to here. Let's look at the second question on the Google Forms. Number 2. What's the most important idea about our big topic in this section, the one we just read, Flower Fugitives, and the text feature, Inside the Bus, From Seed to Plant? From those two sections, what's the most important idea about our big topic in this section? Pause the video here to answer this question, going back to your copy of the text as you need. Nice job. Now that you've answered question number 2, let's keep reading. Student scientists. Without human help, South Florida's orchids had no chance of bouncing back. Orchids grow very slowly. It takes up to 4 years for a seed to become an adult plant. Each orchid seed pod produces millions of seeds as small as a speck of dust. It takes 6 to 8 months for these pods to develop. But unlike other plant seeds that store nutrients within the seed to help it grow, orchid seeds lack this characteristic. Orchid seeds can grow only if they land on a patch of tree bark that has a specific fungus growing on it. This fungus is the growing plant's main food source. Downing estimates that only 10% of orchid seeds germinate or begin to grow into plants in the wild. In a sterile lab, however, Downing and the students can germinate 100% of the seeds. We now directly provide the seeds with the nutrients they need to germinate: sugar, growth hormones, and micronutrients, says Downing. Today, there are thousands of plants slowly growing as part of the Million Orchid Project. That includes containers Alexa planted as a freshman that only now have sprouts big enough to be planted in the wild. Let's pause here and answer question number 3. Question 3. How does this connect with what we've read so far? How does this last section we just read connect with everything else we've read so far? Please pause here to answer the question. Now that you've answered question number 3, let's go back to the text and read that last section. Urban plants. The trickiest part is finding a tree with the fungus that the orchids rely on. That fungi is in the tiniest nook in the tiniest cranny on the highest up branches, says Alexa. When we do find it, it's like a gold mine. After identifying a suitable tree, the plant is attached firmly using a biodegradable adhesive that won't hurt the plant's roots or the tree's bark. The roots will begin to attach over a period of months or years, says Downing. Last summer, the Million Orchid Project planted hundreds of plants across Miami and its suburbs. And they have plans to plant hundreds more this summer. But from Downing's perspective, this is only the beginning. The project's goal isn't just to plant 1 million orchids. Fairchild's Million Orchid Project wants to create a new orchid population that will grow on its own over time. The hope is that these plants will mature, produce flowers, spread seeds, and start to pop up on their own, says Downing. By Jennifer Hackert. And the last text feature, Florida's orchids. These are the 6 orchid species the Million Orchid Project is trying to save. Pine pink orchid, Florida dollar orchid, dancing lady orchid, Florida butterfly orchid, cockleshell orchid, cowhorn orchid. Now that we have read the whole text and answered those guiding questions, it's time for you to jot the main idea. Remember, criteria for success for a main idea. Your main idea jot should be the deepest meaning supported by the text, contextualized, and accurate. Remember this CFS as you jot a strong main idea, and remember it can be a paragraph or bullet points. Make sure your main idea is at least 3 full sentences long. Thank you for reading along with us today as we read the Orchid Bus. Make sure you answer that last opinion question and have an awesome day.